Hey guys, it's me, Cinderella X. I'm just here taking a break from the chimneys. I've been cleaning the chimneys all day and I'm just here with Slippers. Say hi, Slippers. Yeah, she's a good cat. Yes, she is. Anyway, I'm actually getting dressed up right now, which is a very rare thing for me. My fairy godmother, I promised her that I would be the best man at one of her stupid gopher weddings in the forest. So I just gotta, kind of grit my teeth and kind of get through it. It's ridiculous and it's tedious, but if I perform my duties as best man at the stupid gopher wedding, then she'll go away and leave me alone for a few weeks at least. So I'm gonna get that done. But before I do, Timothy Alberino, as maybe if you've listened to me. So anyway, Timothy Alberino, famous fringe hero, explorer, author, he has gone to Peru to investigate these mysterious alien encounters in the jungles of northeastern Peru on the Amazon, in the Amazon jungle basin. And there were reports of aliens coming down and flying down and grabbing people and flying away. There's reports of face peelers. Oh man, face peelers. That sounds terrible. And there were also other reports that no, they were just miners with jetpacks coming down and grabbing people, which is so ridiculous. Miners with jetpacks? That's crazy. It's easier to believe in aliens. Anyway, so Timothy Alberino mounted an expedition to go to that remote village in northeastern Peru, and he did some investigation. Well, he's back, and he's got a report, and wow, let's check it out. Here it is.
My name is Timothy Alberino, and this is the after-action report and analysis of my expedition into the Amazon jungle of Peru, where I investigated the alleged alien attacks and face peeler phenomenon of recent internet fame. Let's begin with a brief review. Some months ago, near the end of July, compelling videos began to surface on social media featuring an alleged alien attack in a remote jungle village called San Antonio de Pintuyacu, which is inhabited by the indigenous Iquitu people and located deep in the Alto Nanay region of the Peruvian Amazon, northwest of Iquitos. The video depicted an alarming scene in which the men of the village were in a state of panic, discharging their firearms into the jungle in the dark of night. Subsequent interviews with the Apu, or chief of the village, revealed that mysterious assailants were making incursions into the village and had attempted to abduct a 15-year-old girl. The girl, whose name is Talia, was able to scream during the altercation with her assailants and was fortunately rescued by her brother and her neighbors, who came running to investigate the commotion. Talia sustained a laceration in her neck and was in a state of chemically induced disorientation for some time after the incident. According to the Apu, whose name is Jairo Reategui, the assailants were arrayed in peculiar body armor with elongated helmets reminiscent of the Green Goblin from the Spider-Man movie, and were able to float through the jungle and lift off into the air. They seemed to be impervious to gunfire as they were shot at point-blank range to no effect and could seemingly disappear into the night. In the video, the Apu made the extraordinary claim that the assailants were not human beings, but extraterrestrials, evidenced by their incredible technological capabilities, which seemed to defy a conventional explanation. The assailants were also described as pelacaras, which translates into English to face peelers. The legend of the Pelacaras is well known in the Peruvian Amazon. I myself had heard of it some 20 years ago when I lived among the native people in a region of the jungle not far from Alto Nanay. According to the legend, strange beings would, from time to time, appear in the remote villages to waylay and abduct individuals who happened to be found alone at night. The corpses of these unfortunate victims would later be discovered with their faces partially or completely removed, exposing the bleached skeletal bone beneath. While many Peruvians associate the Pelacaras with gringos, there is no consensus among the indigenous communities in regard to their origin or identity. Some believe that they represent an international group of organ harvesters funded, perhaps, by cartels, while others maintain that they are non-human beings and even extraterrestrials. Although the descriptions of the Pelacaras vary to some degree in the legends, there are consistent details, such as the fact that the assailants always attack at night and have the ability to silently float through the jungle and fly through the air. Apart from the video which had surfaced from San Antonio, another video appeared on social media featuring an alleged Pelacara encounter in the city of Nauta, which is 2 hours west by road from Iquitos, the capital city of Loreto. The video, captured at night on a cheap smartphone and therefore dark, grainy, and low resolution, seems to depict an alien gray-type being, which is momentarily illuminated by a flashlight. These videos, as well as others, went viral on the internet and provoked much fear and trepidation throughout the jungle regions of Peru. The villagers of San Antonio, who were living in terror, earnestly petitioned the government to dispatch the Navy to protect them from the Pelacara assailants and to conduct a criminal investigation. But, contrary to my original report on the incident, the Navy never responded. Only a couple of police officers eventually arrived from Iquitos to interview Talia about the attempted abduction. These individuals, after conducting a piss-poor investigation, determined that the village was being attacked by river miners equipped with jetpacks who were terrorizing the villagers in an attempt to drive them off their land. This ridiculous fabrication was quickly picked up by the Peruvian press and subsequently by the American press and became the official narrative. As a result, interest in the story soon evaporated. As those of you who have been following my coverage of the story are well aware, I wasn't buying the jetpack miner fabrication. It was obvious to me that something extraordinary was happening in the Peruvian Amazon, and it was apparent that no one had conducted a competent investigation into the matter. So, after receiving many requests from many of you, I decided to organize an expedition to the village of San Antonio de Pintuyacu and investigate the phenomenon myself. I was fortunate in this enterprise to be accompanied by my friend Doug Thornton. Doug is a former infantry Marine and DHS Special Response Team operator, so I was certainly happy to have him at my side. It was through my colleague, Brazilian ufologist Ronnie Vernet, that I was able to make contact with one of the villagers from San Antonio, a young man named Christian, who is the resident schoolteacher, and also happens to be the person who captured the aforementioned video of the alleged Pelacara attack in the village. Per Christian's request, I recorded a message in Spanish via WhatsApp conveying my intentions, which he then delivered to the village elders. After deliberating the matter at a public meeting, the elders replied with an official invitation to visit their community and conduct my investigation. Christian also briefed me on the current situation in the village, which was pretty dire. The villagers were still living in a heightened state of vigilance and, as a consequence, not going out to the jungle to harvest their crops or hunt game. So they were running low on critical supplies. I was informed that the men were actively patrolling the perimeter of the village every night and still encountering the phenomenon, though to a lesser degree. After hearing all of this, the objectives of the expedition became twofold. Aside from conducting my investigation, I also intended to provision the village of San Antonio with rice, beans, sugar, and other food commodities, as well as medical supplies, and to equip them with strategic technology to support their patrols. To this end, we procured high-powered flashlights, radios, thermal binoculars, and night vision goggles with recording capabilities. I want to thank Pastor Darren Tyler, Jamie Brandenburg, and the amazing group of men from Conduit Church in Franklin, Tennessee, who helped me fund the expedition and provision the village. The expenses were considerable, and I couldn't have done it without them. Thank you, gentlemen. Once I had the invitation from Jairo and the village elders and the funds to undertake the expedition, we set out for Peru on the 23rd of October. When we arrived in Iquitos, I chartered a riverboat that could accommodate my crew and the supplies we were bringing with us. Aside from myself and Doug, I was also accompanied by 2 Peruvian active-duty Navy operators and a few of the men from San Antonio, including the Apu. It took us 2 days to make our way to the village on the riverboat. The journey led us up the Nanay River and then its tributary, the Pintuyacu, in Alto Nanay. When we finally arrived, we were met by a small army of men carrying shotguns. I greeted the men from the boat and then disembarked with all of the provisions we had brought with us.
I'm trying to keep my head away from the barrels of these guns.
We were escorted through the village and ushered into a building they call the Tambo, which is a government communication outpost.
Timothy.
At the Tambo, we received a warm welcome from the Iquito community who had assembled to greet us. Despite their rugged living conditions, the village people of the Peruvian Amazon are very formal in their proceedings. I was asked to introduce myself and my crew and to give a speech, and I was happy to oblige.
Bueno, yo soy Timothy Alberino, yo soy un explorador, un investigador, acompañado por mi amigo Doug Thornton.
After my speech, we were presented with some boiled plantains and fish in a show of hospitality, and then treated to a traditional Iquito dance to celebrate our arrival. As custom dictates among these indigenous communities, we were given bowls of masato to drink in their presence. Masato is an alcoholic beverage made with fermented yucca. The women of the community masticate the yucca in their mouths, which is fermented with their saliva. Most gringos do not drink masato, but those who do are received with special affection. After we presented the community with all of the provisions and technology we brought for them, we were eager to begin the investigation. We spent the rest of that day visiting the locations where the mysterious assailants had been encountered and conducting interviews with eyewitnesses. The anxiety in the village was palpable. The villagers had cut down a wide swath of jungle surrounding their community in order to extend their line of sight and create a buffer zone between themselves and the jungle. By cutting down the trees, they could remove the cover that the assailants were using to covertly approach the village in the dark of night and create more real estate to plant crops closer to their homes, as they were no longer venturing out to their plantations. I was surprised by how many of the villagers had actually encountered the so-called Belacaras face to face, and how consistent their descriptions of the beings were. For the sake of brevity, I will summarize the details of what I was told. The assailants are tall. Most estimates describe them as being considerably taller than me, standing somewhere between 6.5 to 7 feet, perhaps even up to 8. They are arrayed in black armored bodysuits and wear large, elongated helmets that cover the entirety of their faces with yellow-tinted, almond-shaped eye lenses. They are equipped with small backpacks, hard shell rather than fabric, and their footwear is very peculiar, with 2 discs on the soles of each shoe. When they leave tracks in the forest floor, they look like 2 circles rather than the typical shoe or boot imprint. They do not carry any visible weapons in their hands, and they are exceedingly agile when they walk and run, even capable of jumping over houses in a single bound. This is likely due to the fact that the discs on the soles of their shoes, which emit a red light, are outfitted with some kind of propulsion technology that enables them to hover a meter off the ground and lunge into the air. In almost every interview I conducted, the assailants are described as surfing on top of circular platforms that are about 3 feet in diameter and that can hover in place or accelerate at high rates of speed. These platforms are encompassed with lights of varying colors and are completely silent as they move through the village, except when they accelerate off the ground, at which point a sound something like compressed air can be heard. The assailants sometimes land the platforms in the jungle, dismount from them, and walk or float into the village. When they are chased out of the village, they remount the platforms and lift off into the air. Some of the circular platforms are extra large with a diameter of about 10 feet and carry 2 people rather than 1. It is interesting to note that the assailants always come in pairs. There are always 2 or groups of 2. Aside from the flying circular platforms, the assailants are also equipped with advanced aerospace vehicles, what we might call UFOs. These craft have been seen by multiple people in the village and are described exactly the same by everyone. The fuselage of the craft is shaped somewhat like an acorn, with the narrow part being the nose and the wider part the aft. They're about the length of a private jet, but much wider, and in the place of wings, they have small, rounded protrusions which fold open and deploy a series of rapidly blinking lights. The craft have been viewed hovering above the village at very low altitude, some 30 to 40 feet, and have no apparent propulsion systems such as engines or propellers. In one case, the craft appeared to be completely transparent, and 2 pilots could be seen sitting inside. Like the circular platforms, the craft are completely silent, except when they accelerate, at which point they make a low-frequency humming sound. The platforms and the craft have been seen on many occasions by many people hovering above or flying over the village. Even according to one account, the very night before we arrived. We spent a total of 2 nights and 3 days in San Antonio de Pintuyacu, and on the final night we met with the men of the village to teach them how to use the high-powered flashlights, radios, and night vision goggles we gave them. Doug, along with Henry, one of our Navy commandos, took the opportunity to train the men in how to properly carry their firearms and patrol in a column so that they don't accidentally shoot each other. It was quite exhilarating watching these guys learn how to organize themselves into a more efficient fighting force, and then to go out and deploy the new tactics and technology on their patrols. If the face peeler assailants appear in the village again, the men of San Antonio are now much better prepared to defend themselves and their families and to capture the phenomenon on camera. To further discuss the details of the expedition and everything we learned in the village, I'm joined now by my comrade, Doug Thornton. Doug, I'm sure the question on everyone's mind right now is, what did you think of that Masato?
It was terrible.
They gave me that bowl of masato, and I drained it like a champ. I actually like masato. I drink a lot of it when I lived in the jungle. But then I turned around and I looked at you, assuming that you also received a bowl of masato. And what do I see? Your beard is covered in this stuff. It looks like you puked all over yourself.
It was a very peculiar taste.
Well, as everyone that knows by now, it's fermented with saliva. With the women sit around and chew it, and it's quite a spectacle. Actually, they have a dugout canoe, sort of a dugout canoe looking thing, like a trough, and all the women sit around. All the older women with the younger women. It's a very traditional thing, and they're sitting there in their traditional garb. They have these mallets in their hands, and they reach into a bucket and they pull out yuca, boiled yuca, and they stick it in their mouths and they chew on it, and then they spit it into the trough and smash it with the sticks. And then they take that and they put it in a bucket and they add some river water and then they let it ferment. So you gave it the old college try, and I think the villagers, when they saw us drinking that masato, they instantly took a liking to us. So well done, sir.
Yeah, I didn't die, so that was good. It was all of my beard. I had shaved most of my beard off. People don't know my beard was at least 3 or 4 inches lower than this, but it was everywhere. I mean, it was instantly I threw up in my mouth. I don't know how you drank it instantly. So bravo to you. I couldn't do it.
I actually like masato, and that was good masato.
I don't want to taste bad masato.
It grows on you, and yeah, you don't want to taste bad masato. Okay, let's now move on. As I just got done saying, you and I spent 2 days and 3 nights in the village. Everyone is wondering, I'm sure, did we see the phenomenon ourselves? We interviewed all of these individuals. I summarized what they said. The answer is no, we did not. We did not see the phenomenon ourselves. We stayed up late at night and waited for the phenomenon to appear. However, it must be said that it did rain. At least one of the nights, perhaps both. The last night, the second night, there was definitely a storm that blew through, and we were told that usually, in fact, the villagers have never experienced an incursion by these serious assailants while it's storming. So they didn't expect us to see anything either. But we did stay up. We had night vision. We had thermal cameras, and we were ready to record the phenomenon, but it did not appear. Let's talk about what I think was the most compelling interview that I conducted in the village, and that is, which you filmed, by the way. Doug filmed everything that you've all seen. Doug filmed all of that on GoPros. We wanted to be very low profile when we arrived in Iquitos. We didn't want to arrive with a bunch of high-end camera gear. We wanted to go in low profile. There was some danger associated with all this. So we decided to do it with GoPros, and Doug filmed all of it. But the most compelling interview, and I know you'll agree with me, was with Talia.
Oh, yeah.
And Talia, the 15-year-old adolescent girl who underwent a very terrifying ordeal. Now, when you and I walked into the village one evening to go and interview Talia, we hadn't spoken with her yet. We walked into the village, into the plaza, and everyone's, of course, this is the way it is in all villages in the Peruvian Amazon. In the evening, the guys play soccer, the women play volleyball. That's what they do. And we walked into the plaza of the village. This is what we found them doing. And Talia was sitting kind of by herself up against a wall, a house. And as soon as she saw us, as soon as she laid eyes on us, and we are, after all, very imposing characters, I think, but as soon as she laid eyes on us, she began to tremble and cry and hide her face from us. And what were your thoughts when you saw Talia?
You could tell that this was a young girl who had had a traumatic experience. I've dealt with people with a post-traumatic experience. In fact, that's what a doctor down the river diagnosed her as having PTSD, and we have that documentation.
Severe PTSD.
You know, the immediately she grabbed her hair, she covered her face. That's also where the two scars were on the side of her neck. And she kept a healthy distance. I mean, a healthy distance, 10, 15, 20 feet at all times away from us. And, you know, we weren't walking right up to the young lady. We were at like I said, a good healthy distance. I had my tripod with a GoPro on it. Tim was talking with Heido and the father eventually. And you could tell, I mean, man, it wasn't probably 2 minutes of us being there. And she knows we're there to interview her, or to at least try to attempt to. She immediately started convulsing. You could see it. The security, Henry, he pointed out first to me that her arms were quivering like this. And then I noticed her hands and her wrists were doing this. And then her legs and her knees, her whole body started to convulse. Very rarely do you ever see that, even in the realms of law enforcement, if there's not something very traumatic tied to that. So you could tell this young girl was very disturbed. She was extraordinarily nervous, not just nervous to be on camera, though, nervous to be around me and Tim. That was the thing that we noticed, to the point, Tim, that I think we actually scared her unintentionally because of our presence.
Yes, and as I said earlier, some Peruvians associate pelacaras with gringos, face peelers with gringos. I would say half of the people I discussed the phenomenon with believe that they're aliens, and the other half believe that they're gringos. And so, you know, this naturally, if that's what she thinks, and she has a little bit of reason to believe that, and we'll get into that in a minute, then obviously our presence in the village would make her very nervous. So we were eventually able to interview Talia, this poor girl, at her house the next day. The Apu of the village, Jairo, suggested that we go to her house the following morning after breakfast. We did so, and her father persuaded her to talk with us. Now, if you recall, Doug, before I started to interview her, and before I started to interview her, she was extremely nervous, just like the previous day. But then after I asked her the first question, and it was simply, Talia, please tell us what happened to you.
Toma tu tiempo, yo sé que es difícil. It's extremely traumatized, this girl.
She just stood there and trembled, head to foot, trembled for probably a good 2 minutes, just stood there silent, trembling. She could not speak. Obviously something very traumatic had happened to her right there in the backyard where we were standing. And the assailants were, my height, I'm 6'1", reminded her of the assailants because they were very tall. So what happened to Talia? What happened to this young lady is that one evening, she was picking fruit from her tree. And this was right after dusk, so it just got dark. She's picking fruit from the tree. She's knocking the fruit down with this long stick, and the fruit falls to the ground. Talia proceeds to bend over and pick up the fruit that fell to the ground, and there are, under the tree, there are some dead leaves, and suddenly she feels this gust of wind behind her, and the leaves, she notices, rustle. As she goes to pick up the fruit, she feels this gust of wind, and the leaves are rustling a little bit on the ground. And so she looks behind her, and what does she see? She sees a person coming up the hill, because the backyard is kind of a little gully. It's forested. There's some jungle there between the other houses. So it's this little gully. We have it on film. And she sees this guy, this person, this thing coming up the hill, almost as if he's surfing on one of these circular platforms. And he comes up the hill and he lands next to her and then immediately grabs her. He seizes her from behind and he places his hand over her mouth. So he's got her from behind and he's got his hand over her mouth so she can't scream. Then she sees another one of these guys coming on another platform up the hill and lands and positions himself in front of her and grabs her leg. So now she is being held by two of these pelacaras, face peelers, one behind her with the hand over the mouth and the other has her legs. The description she gave me of these individuals is identical to what everybody else was saying to us. They were dressed head to foot in black body armor. She even described the body armor in greater detail than anyone else. She described how it was on the forearms and on the shins, and the chest was some sort of like a breastplate, metallic, and they were wearing these helmets, these large helmets, elongated helmets. I covered the entirety of their faces. So the very same description that everybody else gave to us, this is what Talia encountered. They were very tall. One of them, which she calls the gringo, was taller than me, considerably taller than me. The other, I think she said, was about my height, if I recall. That one I dubbed the Peruvian. The reason why is because according to Talia, these individuals spoke Spanish. The taller one, she says, spoke Spanish like me, like a gringo with an accent. And the smaller one spoke like a Peruvian. And I specifically asked Talia, the Spanish that this individual spoke, was there an accent? Was it Ecuadorian? Was it Bolivian? Was it Cuban? Or did it sound like Peruvian? Did they have an accent? She said he sounded just like all of us. So I started calling this individual the Peruvian. So that's how I'm going to refer to them. The Peruvian face peeler and the gringo face peeler. We don't know if they're people. I'm not saying they're human beings. This is the testimony that Talia gave us there in her backyard. So these individuals have her in this manner, but they're hovering, mind you. They're hovering on these platforms, and they proceed to lift her up. Now, I don't recall, Doug, if she was telling us something about how she was speaking very, very softly. She was very nervous. She was telling us something about how they attempted to lift her off the ground, but couldn't. Somewhere in the course of this encounter, they were attempting to lift her off the ground, and for some reason, they were having a hard time. So they took her behind this hut that's there on the property. And then they proceeded to take out a powder. The Peruvian put some powder in his hand, and then he put some cream. He had this little bottle with cream in it, and he mixed the powder and the cream together. Then he took a nasal syringe, he sucked up the substance and shot it up her nose. Then they took out a larger tube, almost like, it sounded like, and I asked her, like, sort of like a large toothpaste packet. And they put the cream on their hands. And this was the guy that had her from behind. So recall, the gringo has her from behind. He's covering her mouth. The Peruvian has her by the feet. And the gringo proceeds to smear this cream all over her face. And she said that her face instantly went numb when the cream was applied, and it began to swell. And she even tells us that at that point she heard the Peruvian guy say, be careful, don't apply too much. You're going to ruin the flesh. And then she later explained that what she heard them saying was something about how if they apply too much, the flesh is going to stick to the skin when they take it off. Something along those lines. It wasn't exactly clear, but something like that. And then, and I may be skipping some minor details, and then they took out one of them took out a small device that you and I think is a laser scalpel. and they began to make an incision in her neck. In other words, they were very likely going to peel her face off, just like the legends say. At this moment, Talia began to struggle. She began to lift up the mask, the helmet of the guy behind her, the gringo holding her from behind. And as she was doing this, somebody, I think it was him, or if not the proving guy who was holding her legs, one of them slapped her in the face. And when they did this, they dropped her. And this gave her a moment in which her mouth was no longer being covered, and she was able to scream. And so she hits the ground, she screams. Her brother and her family members are on the other side of the house on the porch, sitting there outside. They have their flashlights on them. Talia's brother gets on the scene with his flashlight. The neighbors are up higher on the hill. They come down with their flashlights, and they all see the same thing. What they see are two individuals, these two individuals we just described, dressed in black, head to foot, very tall, hovering on these platforms, on these circular platforms. And Talia is lying there on the ground, bloodied up from the incision in her neck. Her face is swollen. And Talia says that at this moment, she heard the Peruvian face peeler say to the gringo, let's go, let's get out of here. And the gringo replied, no, we can't just leave her here. And according to Talia, he proceeded to grab her by the hair and try to drag her and perhaps lift her off the ground on his platform. The neighbors see this. They have their flashlights. They start to yell. And eventually the gringo drops her. And these guys maneuver themselves to where there's an opening in the trees. And they lift off the ground at a high rate of speed and disappear into the sky.
One of the things to understand here is that this is an area that is residential. It's surrounded by houses. Where this event happened was in her backyard. It's the one fruit tree that's in her backyard. Down a slope is a big chicken coop type thing, and then it goes back uphill, and that's where supposedly Talia was found by her father or brother, one of the two.
No, she was not found on the hill. She was found actually lying behind that hut.
Right in that little gully.
Now,
area.
maybe she can't remember, Doug. Maybe that's the last thing she remembers. Maybe the gringo, let's call him the gringo face peeler, maybe he dragged her up the hill by her hair.
Yeah.
So yeah, she's out of it. She's only at this point she's under the influence of an induced some sort of a chemical that's inducing a semi-conscious state, and she's basically going unconscious at the end of this.
Yeah,
incident.
I wish we could have had a toxicology test done on her to see if it was narcotic based or not. The cream that she put on, or that was put on her face, reminiscent to me, it sounds like a very high dosage lidocaine mixed with something else that vasodilates the blood vessels in the face. We did see the two scars. We saw them. Actually, it was Cisla, the father, showed us the picture on his phone the night it happened. And it looked like two burn marks.
Mm-hmm.
It looked like lacerations. It looked like the beginnings of two distinct burn marks, where not like it was precision, but like if someone was struggling. They missed the mark the first time and restarted.
Right.
One line was longer, one line was shorter. One of the things that she described, though, is as the man grabbed her, whichever one it is that grabbed her the first time by the fruit tree, he was down on the surface and hit something on his ankle like a button, and
That's
activated the circular platform.
Yeah, that caused it to lift off the ground. Yeah.
Yeah. So thinking of this, they had to move so quickly, both of these guys, that we're not talking about like a hoverboard that you can buy at, some knick-knack place, even one that costs tens of thousands of dollars. This is a piece of equipment that's very agile, very mobile, and is very efficient, which is not what we've researched lately. We haven't researched anything that matches the description of what these guys were
No,
on.
we have nothing like this. This is not conventional technology. From all the descriptions that we've heard, it does not appear that we're dealing with propellers. This is some other kind of propulsion system. As I mentioned earlier, they have backpacks. They're not fabric backpacks. They're hardened backpacks, hard shell backpacks. You and I surmised out there in the field when we were talking to these people that perhaps we're talking about battery packs or maybe even small reactors, something like that. And their feet seem to snap into these boards, into these circular platforms. Again, the boots have their own little discs on them, and they're capable of hovering without the boards, just with their boots. But when they snap into the boards, I'm calling them boards, but when they snap into the platforms, the circular platforms, they can accelerate at a high rate of speed. So they have capabilities on these circular platforms that they don't have with just their shoes, with just whatever kind of technology, whatever sort of technology is being deployed from their shoes. So I think we can agree that there's nothing like this, certainly in the commercial sector. I would highly doubt that there's anything like this in the military sector yet. Maybe we're developing something like that. But, we've called these men, we've called them guys. I want to be clear at this point and make this known right up front. I don't know if these are human beings or something else. I don't know. They're unusually tall. And because Talia was subjected to this extremely traumatizing incident, which we know happened because the neighbors confirmed it, they saw the guys. They saw Talia lying there bloodied up, and they saw these individuals escaping on their platforms, on their hovering platforms. So it happened. However, because she's been exposed to such trauma, I think that her recall of the event is probably skewed. I would say that there's confabulation, and also I think that she was aware of the fact that Pelacaras are in the village before it happened, and maybe was assuming that Pelacaras are gringos and maybe confabulating the speaking. And the reason why I say that is because no other person that we talked to in the village mentioned anything about any of these guys speaking or yelling, even when they were shot. There was no yelling. They weren't barking commands at anyone or at each other. Only Talia heard them speaking. So this is sort of an anomaly, and it might be confabulation, and maybe it's not. Maybe they were speaking. If they are speaking Spanish, like she says, then we're dealing very probably with human beings, or perhaps something else that's a little more interesting. But we're likely not dealing with extraterrestrials or something like that. However, I think it would be a mistake to believe every detail of Talia's story because of the fact that she's so traumatized and is likely confabulating.
Yeah, I would like to say this about this encounter, though, is that this was a very violent encounter. It happened very quickly, and both of these assailants could not properly grab hold of a 15-year-old, maybe 5'2", maybe 110-pound girl, and they could not create enough thrust to lift her up. When the body goes limp like this, it's very hard actually to pick someone up, but for whatever these things are to be as tall and as built as they said that they were, they didn't say they were skinny or lanky. They said that they were very big. They had problems dealing with her.
I'm not sure they had problems dealing with her. I think because there was some confusion from Talia in regard to lifting her up. Maybe she assumed they were trying to lift her up in the air, when in reality they were only dragging her behind that thatch roof building there to cut her face off or do whatever else they were going to do to her. So it could be that they were not trying to lift off the ground with her, that was exactly what they had planned to do, was just to quickly cut her face off and leave. Or it could be that they were going to literally abduct her for other things as well as cutting her face off. Human trafficking, who knows? But we're not clear on that. Again, I think that there's a lot of confabulation happening. She's filling in the gaps of her memory, certainly to some extent, but she was found lying on the ground. Once again, I'll reiterate, bloodied, and the neighbors and her brother trained their flashlights on these things, these beings who are floating on these circular platforms. And the platforms have lights. You know, they've got lights all around them, and they're clearly visible. And you can only see the guys on top, by the way, when you flash the flashlight on them. Let's talk about that for a moment. In the beginning, when I first became aware of the events that were unfolding in this village, and back in late July, I remember that some of the accounts, some of the people were saying that from the village that these entities could disappear or something along those lines. And having discussed the matter with them there in person in great detail, many people in the village we talked to, eyewitnesses, it appears to me that they're not actually disappearing. It appears to me that either they're just leaving really quickly on this technology, or their armor has some sort of a cloaking effect. Because when they fly on the platforms, you cannot see them unless you train a light on them. So it could just be because it's dark and they're wearing black, but it feels to me that it's more than that. It feels to me that there's some inherent property in the body armor that is akin to a cloaking device or causes that person to be more difficult to see at nighttime. That's the feeling I got. I feel like there's technology involved that's making it appear to these villagers that these guys are disappearing. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the way that the color was described was very unique, that it was black. They said it to the point that it seemed like it was a darkened color that had no void to it. Talia is the only one who actually gave us a better description of what they were wearing than anyone else. And it makes me think, dark sky, dark equipment, dark uniform apparel. But if you're going to shine a light on it, even if you're wearing dark clothing, it's still going to be able to appear very easily. And, they had street lights out there. They got lights that are out there at night.
They have a generator. Yep. They have a generator.
And they're not seeing them unless there is some sort of a higher powered light directly pointed on them. You're not seeing an outline of them. So it's either they are just that stealthy, or it's some sort of a stealth technology that we don't understand yet that they're wearing as well. Yeah,
they are coming in. They were making incursions into the village from the jungle. And as I mentioned, they burned 4 or 5 acres of jungle down,
at least,
all around the village, like a moat. And then they planted yucca and so forth, but they wanted to create a line of sight and a buffer zone between themselves and the jungle, because these beings were making incursions into the village from the jungle. In fact, we were told that they had gone into the jungle and set up traps, and the kind of traps that these guys use, and they use these traps all the time. They're very dangerous. They use these traps all the time to catch game in the jungle, and they consist of a barrel, a rudimentary barrel, and a cartridge inside the barrel, and they have some sort of a device that ignites the cartridge, a shotgun shell. We're talking about 16 gauge birdshot. So there's a trip line, there's a barrel, and then there's a cartridge inside of the barrel that gets ignited when the line is broken, when the line is tripped. And they usually set these traps. They usually set them about, maybe about a foot off the ground, because they're trying to catch all kinds of game. And most of the game in the jungle is going to be small. Even the deer are small in the jungle. But this time, because they weren't trying to catch game, they were trying to catch these assailants, these mysterious assailants. They raised the barrels up, very dangerous. And in fact, unfortunately, a woman from the village accidentally walked into one and it blew a hole through her thighs. She survived, and I think she kept her legs, but it was a bloody mess. But at nighttime, after they set these traps, they set 9 of them in the jungle, all around the village. They would hear the traps going off. They would hear the shotgun blasts going off in the jungle. And then the next day, when they would go investigate the traps, the ropes were broken, the trip lines were broken, and there were imprints in the ground. There were tracks, just as I described earlier. Tracks. The tracks looked like 2 circles. They did not look like boots. They looked like those 2 discs that are on the bottom of these things, footwear. And so we're talking about a very physical, invasive phenomenon that are tripping these trip lines, getting hit with shotgun shell getting hit with birdshot from 16 gauge cartridge at point blank range that blew a hole in this lady's thighs, right?
Still lethal. Yeah, it's still very lethal.
And apparently does nothing to these guys. There's no shreds of clothing or armor. There is no blood. And these guys, by the way, these are hunters. These are very, very adept hunters in the jungle. They know how to track animals. They know if an animal gets shot in one of these traps or gets clipped, they know how to track that animal. These are not idiots. They're better hunters than any of us. So they're very keen observers in that regard. And nothing. The traps had no effect. And I found that very, very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, for one thing, the danger level of those type of traps is very present. But when Heido, the Apu, when he was explaining where he was putting it, we were actually in the hotel the first day in Iquitos, and he specifically said around hips, so almost 3 feet off the ground. And we asked why, and he said because they're so big. Because they're so big, they're so tall.
Yeah. So right, exactly. Right. So he's trying to shoot their knees. It sounds like he's trying to blow their knees off with the traps.
Yeah, he's definitely trying to demobilize them.
Yeah,
that's definitely. And look, along with Talia's thing, I talked to a couple of veteran friends of mine and a couple cop friends of mine, and I asked them, would you take point blank shot with a 16 gauge bird shot? No, absolutely not. So, tactically, when you think about this, for a man to willfully put himself into a line of threat where you have, there's at least 25 guys there with shotguns. They're going to be shooting at you. They were shooting at stuff.
Yes.
I would feel very
at the drop
uncomfortable.
Of a hat.
Yeah. I would feel super uncomfortable. I would have to be at least 100 yards away, and maybe I would feel a little comfortable. But these guys were up close. The assailants were up close. I mean, close enough within the fact that it's still considered to be possibly lethal range. Mm-hmm. And nothing would happen. Nothing would happen when they would fire. We heard a mixed bag of cats when we asked what would happen when they would fire. That either the rounds would go through them, which could mean that they just missed, and their perception is that it went through them, or that the one assailant was hit and dropped and then stood right back up.
That's right. And also, a couple of the guys described a dinging sound, like the pellets dinging off of armor on metal. That's right. Yeah. And now it should be noted that these guys, they buy their 16 gauge birdshot, a birdshot for their 16 gauge shotguns, and they open them up. They open the cartridges up and they modify the shot inside. So I don't know how many pellets how many BBs those cartridges have, but what they do, and they will fuse them together. They'll melt some together. They'll create larger projectiles. And Hydro was telling me that they were using these in the traps too, that they created larger slugs, right? Larger projectiles. So we're not just talking about the BBs of birdshot. These guys are modifying their cartridges. These are very, very, even though they didn't seem to care very much about cleaning their guns, which is very common in the jungle, but they are very adept at modifying, and they're very clever, people. Yep. They're very clever people, and And it apparently occurred to them that maybe the bird shot is too small. And so they were creating, as I said, they were creating larger projectiles to no effect. And it cannot be stressed enough that they're not just seeing these things, they're confronted with these things. They would run to them. They're having physical encounters with these face peelers, with these assailants, whatever you want to call them. They're having physical encounters with them. One individual told me that he swore to me that the face peeler that he encountered, and there was a couple of them, but he had his light trained right on this guy, and he was not very far away from him. He swore to me that the body armor of this individual was silver. Mm-hmm. It was silver, and that's why the original reporting, Jairo said that they're plateado, that they're wearing silver shiny body armor, because that was this individual's testimony. Everybody else said they were black, metallic, but black. So I don't know if they can change the color of the body armor. Maybe it goes into a stealth mode, right? Maybe there's a stealth mode. Maybe it's something much more advanced than we have. Obviously, whatever body armor these things have is more advanced than anything we have in the military. To be able to take routinely 16 gauge shotgun blasts, point blank range, and not injure any of them, no blood, right? Like you said, I think somebody said one fell down, right? Just because of the blast of the shotgun. But my God, if it's going to knock you down on your butt, I mean, you would expect the guy to be shouting and yelling, right? You would expect that individual, let's say it was a group of mercenaries, right, who are there to human traffickers, mercenaries with advanced technology. One of them gets shot point blank range, falls on his butt. You would imagine that you would hear him yell, right, and then call out to his buddies, I'm hit, or something like that, or whatever, right? Nothing. They don't talk except for. You'd be expecting radio communication. That's right, radio communication, at least through their helmets. And the only account we have of any of them making any noise at all is Talia. At one point, I was surrounded. You were actually inside, I think, at this point, and I was outside getting. Oh, we probably had 15 I was outside getting devoured by chiggers. You were inside or standing on an anthill, and I was surrounded by probably 20 guys, and they're all rapid fire telling me their encounters with these guys, with these assailants, and each one had a story. Each one saw him, and some of them saw him close up. One guy told me that. One guy told me that while he was patrolling, there was lightning, and it wasn't raining, but there was lightning. It's rainy season now, so there's lightning a lot out there. Sometimes it rains, sometimes it's just lightning. And he saw a flash of lightning, and he was watching one of these platforms flying through the sky, one of these large discs flying through the sky at a slow rate of speed. And he's looking at it, and there was a lightning flash. And when the lightning flashed, he saw two guys standing on it, side by side. So this was a larger disc, and there were two guys standing side by side on it. And it just sort of hovered around, and then it went into the jungle. So it's not, they don't just, and they always, as I said before, they always come 2 by 2. They're always coming in pairs. Now, probably groups of pairs also, but they're always coming in pairs. They're described as being inhumanly agile. That was made clear to us, if you recall, especially by one guy in particular, who they had a very interesting encounter. According to him, they chased these things through the jungle, and these guys jumped in. These face peeler entities jumped into the river at one point. That's what he says. And he said they were inhumanly agile. They couldn't catch them. They could not catch these guys. And one lady was describing an encounter with them in which one of these entities leapt over her house. Yep. And so over the tops of trees. Over the tops of trees. That's right. And we're talking about going from running, not floating, running, or perhaps floating, but on the boots, not on the discs. And they're able to jump over the houses. But when they snap into the discs, assuming they magnetically snap into the discs, I don't know, I'm making an assumption here. When they snap into the platforms, these circular platforms, then they can take off at high rates of speed. They can zoom around above the village. They can go way up in the air. So it's like another level of ability when they snap into these platforms. But even without the platforms, we are talking about inhumanly agile creatures, things, people, super soldiers. Take your pick.
Yeah, that was a common trait. They were tall, they were large framed, they were very agile. Going back to the description of the boots, they talked about them gliding with the boots on their feet, just gliding. They talked about them running with them, walking, finding very large footprints, and every single person said a footprint this big.
Yes, very large, but that's a good point.
Very large.
The footprints were unusually large. They made that very clear to us. Now, obviously, Doug and I wanted to look at the footprints, but it had been a month or so before, according to some, that they were in the village the night before we came, but we don't know that we can believe that account. But the consensus among the guys on the patrol was they hadn't really encountered these guys for about a month or so. And when they would encounter them, they would routinely find the footprints. And they were all adamant. They were huge. They were big footprints. They did not look like human footprints. These things were very large. So, and this is why, by the way, this is one of the reasons why Jairo, the chief, the Apu, in the original video that came out from the village, which Christian filmed, by the way, that's why he said, these are not men. These are not men. These are extraterrestrials. And I asked Jairo about that. Why did you say they were extraterrestrials? And his answer to me was because of their unconventional capabilities. Basically, is what he told me. They have technology that seems far too advanced for human beings. They're large. They leave strange footprints. So, but then you have, of course, these other details where you feel like you're dealing with humans, such as in the case with Talia. So, everyone's going back and forth, even Jairo, all the villagers, by the way, all the villagers are going back and forth. They're saying, maybe they're men. We think they're men. We think they're organ harvesters. And then later on, as we're discussing certain details, it's like, maybe they're aliens. Maybe they're not people because this doesn't make any sense. So maybe they're aliens. It's like vacillating back and forth always. They're not miners. That's definitely what they are. Not miners with jetpacks. I should have said that right out of the gates. Okay, that's a good point, Doug. No one told us anything about jetpacks.
Nope.
They were not flying around with jetpacks. Full stop. Nope. Jetpacks. That was a complete and utter fabrication. No jetpacks.
The platforms that they use, these apparatus, they were always very stealthy, very silent, and they barely made any type of, I don't even know if we considered it to be a humming noise whenever it would thrust and it would lift up.
Yes, it was like I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but I imagined it as compressed air, like a compressed air sound, just momentarily. They would hear this little sound. It wasn't super loud. They would hear it. It was audible as these things accelerated, as they lifted off the ground. So maybe there's an initial thrust that's needed before they get going to get off of the ground. Aside from these hovering circular platforms, you also have what I'm describing as advanced aerospace vehicles that these guys travel in. This is really fascinating to me. The first time we heard this was a particular woman, an older woman, was describing the encounter she had with these beings, several encounters she had with these beings. By the way, we really got a sense of how terrified these people were. She said that during the height of this thing back in July and August, all of the families, because obviously these are very tight-knit communities, they have families, large families in the community, and she said all of the families that normally live separated from each other in different houses were all huddled together. So all of her family members, she said, they're sleeping on the ground. They're all huddled together. They were terrified. Every time they heard a sound, they'd run outside with their flashlights. She said they were living in abject terror. And she said that one night she observed about 30 or 40 feet above her house. She looked up and she saw this vehicle hovering there silently. It was just hovering silently above her house. And she drew, I asked her, what did it look like? She described it the best she could. She described that it wasn't like an airplane in that it didn't have wings. It had these little stubby protrusions on the side. And then she drew, and I don't know if we have this on camera, she drew the shape of it in the ground, in the
almost
dirt.
Acorn-like.
It was very much like, sort of like an acorn shape. And I believe someone else told us that as well. She definitely did. She drew it in the sand. And you and I were like, wow, that's really bizarre. Like, that's really weird. If she would have drew like a saucer, right, or a cigar-shaped thing.
Or a delta.
Or some sort of a delta shape. But this was extremely bizarre. Of course, I've seen something like this myself in Cleveland, Ohio, so that's why it was really intriguing to me. But she drew this for us. She recounted the incident. It made no sound. It hovered completely silently. There were no propellers. There were no engines. There was no propulsion system to speak of. It just hovered 30, 40 feet above her house. It was about the size of a large helicopter, like a Chinook or a troop carrier, or a small jet aircraft, like a private jet. But it was not thin like that. It was wider, like an acorn shape, something like that. Now, she told us that, and you and I were just sort of like, wow, that's really weird, you know. And then later that evening, a gentleman came up to me, an older gentleman came up to me, and he wanted to tell me what he saw a month ago or 2 months ago. And he proceeded to tell me this story, that they have what's called the Cocha. You have the main river, and then you have a Cocha. The Cocha is a little tributary to the river. Sometimes it's a lake, sometimes it's a pond, sometimes it's a little tributary river. In San Antonio de Pintuyacu, they have a little tributary river that wraps around. That's their Cocha. And they will often set their nets in the Cocha. When we were there, it was barely connected with the river because the river was so low. But a couple months ago, he was checking his nets at nighttime. And I think he told me 3 in the morning or 2 in the morning. And that's not uncommon. These guys will go out in the middle of the night, check their nets. So he's sitting there on his canoe in the water, pulling his nets up to check his nets. And suddenly, he said, everything around him was lit up like daytime. He said it was like the lights were turned on, like the sun came up. It was daytime all of a sudden around him. And he's looking down at his net and the water, and there's this reflection in the water, and he realizes there's something above him that is projecting a light. And he looks up, and about 30 or 40 feet above him is one of the craft that we just described. And he described it exactly. In fact, he drew it for me on a chalkboard. I had him draw it with an acrylic marker on an acrylic board. He drew this craft, which we're showing you right now. He drew this craft, and it was exactly what that lady had described. It was exactly the same thing. And he described a detail that she did not, because she didn't see this particular feature. He said that it was completely transparent. He was looking up through it from the bottom. So what he drew for me was his vantage point from the bottom. He's looking up through the craft, and he sees what he calls 2 bundles, which he thinks were 2 people inside of the craft. And I asked him, are you sure they're people? He said, yes, they were moving. They're like 2 people sitting there, but he's looking from the bottom up at them. So they're sitting on seats or something, right? He's looking straight up through it. He said it was like mesh. It was like mosquito netting. It was like looking through mosquito netting, he told me. And he described this craft in great detail. He said the little protrusions, little rounded protrusions on the side of the craft, they opened up. And these little wing type things came out, and they had a bunch of lights on them, and the lights were flashing really fast. And he said he felt like they were scanning, like it was scanning something. And then all of a sudden, he heard some kind of a noise. It began to hum. They hum as they accelerate. And then all of a sudden, he saw like some sort of a exhaust, he described, but it wasn't like a jet. He said it wasn't like a jet, it wasn't like an airplane, it was something else that sort of exhausted out the back and then it shot off. And so we're not just talking about these very tall things dressed in black head to foot with these elongated, large helmets flying around on circular platforms. We are now talking about advanced aerospace vehicles. They also are flying around in, for lack of a better term, UFOs, which was not reported early on in the videos, but so many of the villagers, not all of them, so many of them have seen these. And that was a facet of the phenomenon that surprised us because we weren't expecting to encounter that.
Yeah, and to make a reference point here, the government officials that we had interviewed had also not believed any of the testimonies really from these people. We definitely believed the testimonies. Everyone said the same thing. There was very little change when they described these people, these beings, whatever we were calling them, the vehicles that they flew on personally, these platforms, and then the larger craft. They were all very similar. They all had a very similar ability. For one, was stealth. You didn't see it unless you were right there. You just never saw them. So once again, 2 people per craft. That's a common trait.
Yes, no sound. Nothing made any sound unless it was accelerating. The craft
never landed, by the way, either.
The large craft, no, I never heard it. No one ever described it landing. It's always hovering and then taking off. And there were at least a few people who talked about those craft above the village, and then that one individual above the river, which seemed to be looking at him like it put the light right on him. It wasn't happenstance that it was right above him like that. Let's talk about, before we forget, let's switch gears. We'll come back to San Antonio and do a summary, our final thoughts and analysis. But let's switch gears and talk about the Nauta incident. Because after we did the investigation in San Antonio de Pintuyacu, we went back down the river, back to Iquitos, and we got in a vehicle and drove to Nauta. Nauta's 2 hours west of Iquitos. Southwest of Iquitos, and this is where that particular video was filmed, in which it appears that we might be looking at some sort of a gray alien type being in the video. So we wanted to go and investigate that, observe that location during daylight hours, so that we can get a sense of the perspective and of the size of whatever it was they were looking at, and we were able to do that. Now, let me say that I made a mistake in the original reporting on this incident. I had conflated the first video of the villagers firing into the jungle with this second video. I thought that they both had occurred in San Antonio de Pintuyacu. I should have known better. It says Nauta on the video, and I realized while we were in the village, wait a minute, this is Nauta. This is not San Antonio de Pintuyacu. And what did you say the distance is from San Antonio de Pintuyacu to Nauta, Doug? Earlier you said it was
55.5 miles as the crow flies through the densest jungle in the world.
Yes.
You're not getting there quickly.
Right. So, and Nauta, it needs to be, we need to understand that San Antonio de Pintuyacu has a population of 200. Nauta has a population of 35,000. This is not a village. This is a small city. Very well-known city, connected through a road to Iquitos, the main city, the capital city of the province of Loreto, in the northern jungles of Peru. And we went there during the day. We found the spot. We found the exact spot where the video was taken. Here's the pole. Here's the tin roof. They're standing along here, various people. One had a camera. He's probably standing on the other side of this pole, or right here. And then the guy with the flashlight was also standing over here, or here. He might have been standing here, and the guy filming was there, flashing up there. But it happened somewhere in this area, right up in there. There was something there. We learned something very interesting here in Nauta. And this occurred around the same time, in that same window, July, August, right? as the events in San Antonio de Pintuyacu, all right? And what's really fascinating and what we did not know is that the people of Nauta saw and experienced the very same phenomenon as the people in San Antonio de Pintuyacu. The very same phenomenon. They saw the guys flying around on the circular platforms, and they saw UFO-type craft hovering above the city, all right? And we think, you and I think, because of one of the depictions that were drawn in the dirt for us of what they saw, we think they were looking up at a disc in this particular case. They were looking up at a typical saucer. Yep. We don't know that for sure, but it looks to both of us that that's what they're looking at from the bottom up, from that vantage, right? And so we were there. We took video of my interview with these individuals. We filmed the location in daylight, tried to get the exact same angle, and we were surprised to discover that the trees that you can see in the video, they look like they're close to the roof of that house, when in fact they're not. They're actually quite in the background. There's a very large aguaje tree, and then there's some smaller trees next to it, and that's where they were looking and flashing the flashlight. So that was a surprise to me, how it's not in close proximity to the house. It's behind the house, not super far behind the house, but it's back there in the background. And they were not flashing a flashlight over there because they saw a being. Rather, they saw a craft. Yep. They saw this craft hover above the tree, this large aguaje tree, and it was projecting a light down. And during this very night, the villagers were on edge. Why? The citizens of Nauta were on edge. Why? Because they were hearing gunshots go off. And we found out that these gunshots, and the woman who we were talking to found out that the gunshots were the very same thing that was happening in San Antonio de Pintuyacu. There's a patrol going around Nauta, right? And they were encountering these guys on discs and firing at them, just like in San Antonio. That's going on in the background. So that's the context of this video. So then they see this craft hovering, and what are they thinking? Pela cara, right? And I showed them the video, and you slowed the video down, where we think, and not just us, but others as well, that what we're looking at is some sort of a gray alien type creature that you can see it moving its head from side to side. They did not see that. They were interested in the craft. Okay, so that is the origin of that video. That's the context. They saw a craft, probably a saucer. They're putting their flashlight over there, and they're capturing potentially something else. Now, what's interesting about this is that if indeed, and we don't know, but if indeed what we are looking at in that video is some sort of a large gray alien or insectoid type being, we now know, you and I now know because of the distance, that creature, that being would have to be, what do we calculate, 7 to 9 feet tall?
At least.
7 to 9 feet tall, with a massive head, which it would have if it were 7 to 9 feet tall. We were on our boat, harbored there at San Antonio de Pintuyacu one night. You pulled up the video on your laptop, and you slowed it down. And we had our Navy guys, Henry and Perez, we had them look at the video along with a couple of guys from the village. We just said, hey, what do you guys think about this? We knew at that point it was filmed in Nauta. I should have known that from the beginning. And I said, this was filmed in Nauta. What do you think about this? We want to try and go and hunt this down, right? This video, the location where this was filmed. So they stood there and they watched the video. You played it back to them on your laptop. And they immediately said, there's something there. There's something there.
We didn't point to them where it was.
Nope. And they even pointed out the eyes. Looks like there's two black eyes with those flashlights shining off of them. And then I said, what do you think about this picture? And we flipped on your laptop to a picture that I had brought with me of a insectoid, the typical rendition of an insectoid according to the abduction accounts, right? And they were shocked. They said immediately, all of them, everyone standing around said, that's it. That's what we're seeing. And then they said, bring the video back up. And then we put them side by side, the insectoid and whatever it is in the video, and we played it back, and there's just all of them. There's probably 5 guys standing behind us, our Navy guys and the villagers, and they're going, "That's it. That's the same thing. That's what's there. This insectoid picture. That's it. That's what we're looking at. Look at it. It's moving its head. You can see the light on its eyes." And we told them, we don't know what this is, but maybe it's this. There's a possibility. We don't know. And up until this point, our security detail, these Navy commandos, were cool as a cucumber, right? They were hearing all of the accounts, all of the testimony. They were with us the whole time. We would discuss it with them later on. They heard everything that was said in the village, the pelacaras. They were there when we interviewed Talia. None of that fazed these guys. These guys are very professional. None of that fazed them. But after they saw that video, I remember Henry, who's a jungle survival instructor, Henry put his hand over his mouth like this. And he's just looking, and he goes like this. He said, "Now I'm a little nervous. That makes me nervous. Now I'm a little nervous. There's something in that video." He said, I think... Go ahead.
He immediately told Paris to get the flashlight.
That's right.
And start walking around outside immediately.
Yep.
Cool as a cucumber. We're talking about guys, and besides Henry and Paris, the Apu and at least 20 or more of the guys in this village are all veterans of the Peruvian army. To one faction or the other, but they had served in the military for Peru. So these are guys who all have a familiarity of tactics, of weapons, of guys in suits. What we showed them on the screen disturbed them.
It disturbed them. All of them, not just Henry. They were all just sort of there. And I remember I told you right then and there, I said, "Hey, you know what this reminds me of? This reminds me of that scene from Signs where I forget the guy's name.
Walks out.
Where the alien, where there's that party in Brazil and they're all yelling, and all of a sudden you see that alien walk out, and what's his name? Joaquin Phoenix. He goes like this and he covers his mouth up and he's just in shock. That's kind of what the look on all of their faces was when we showed them that depiction of the insectoid, that rendition of the insectoid next to what was potentially being depicted in this video, being captured in this video. That's what their reaction was. Now, that isn't to say that we're not saying that it's 100% like a large gray alien or something. I don't know what the heck is there. Maybe nothing, but it sure looks like something to me. And the fact that they saw a disc above that tree, most likely a disc hovering above that tree, and then this thing appears in the footage, is very compelling.
There was a report within Nauta of the boy. Was that confirmed to be in Nauta?
It wasn't in Nauta. It was in another village that was almost parallel with San Antonio de Pintuyaco, a little bit closer to Nauta. And there was a boy who recently was nearly abducted, just like Talia, by one of these guys on platforms, or a couple of these guys on these hovering platforms, and he sustained really bad lacerations in his neck. In fact, he was bleeding out. It was very gruesome. He was on the news in Peru. They took him to the hospital. He told the same story as Talia, pretty much. And I don't remember the conditions that led to his rescue, but he almost died. He was in the hospital for a long time, and he eventually, thank God, the boy recovered and was able to heal from the wounds. But very, very similar to the incident with Talia. Very similar. So I want to talk about two things before we forget. Let's talk about how you and the Navy guys were able to train. You did some training some military training with men of Pintuyacu, of San Antonio de Pintuyacu.
Weapons safety handling was atrocious. Actually, one of the first things that happened when we got there, because I had met with the security guys, and I said, "Look, we've already heard that they've shot themselves. We've heard that one girl got shot. I want all ammunition out of the barrels of all guns." And Henry ensured that it was.
That's the first thing he did. That's the first thing he did when he disembarked. When all those guys were standing on the shore, he disarmed all. He made them all take the cartridges out of their shotguns because they were loaded.
Yeah, we had at least 20 men meet us with guns on the shore, which you said is very unusual, doesn't normally happen, and then accompanied us all the way through the village. And every day we were there, I mean, it didn't matter what time of day, the men had their guns on them.
I can't tell you how many times I had a shotgun barrel pointed directly at my face.
Yep. I mean, it was so reminiscent to Iraq and training Iraqis. We taught them a better way. And so, hey, muzzles pointed to the deck, fingers straightened off the trigger, weapons on safe if they had a safety. The governor's gun that I was using as a demonstration was held together with copper wire. I've never seen a shotgun held together with copper wire. I saw at least half the guns there held together with like coat hanger wire. And when I actually got the governor's gun and I looked down the barrel, and there was a big chunk of mud inside the barrel. I'm like, you know what? Whatever, man, it'll fire. It's been firing.
Okay. So they have the most basic rudimentary of weapons. These are 16 gauge shotguns. If you can see, this is very badly rusted. The break action is fabricated. I'm not even sure how well these will fire. I mean, they'll fire. They have one shot, and it's going to take some time to reload. This barrel is filled with debris. These weapons are not very well maintained or taken care of. And for anyone coming here to hurt these people, this is the perfect people. They have almost no defense. You might as well throw rocks.
I know.
This is filled with dirt.
They don't have the proper equipment. They don't have the relevance of continued training. So we gave them proper equipment. We gave them basic patrol tactics, mainly for safety. It's mainly for safety. We want them to be able to employ themselves to the best of their ability, because they're patrolling no matter what. Regardless of if we came there or not, they were doing this. Yeah. So we gave them a more efficient way of patrolling within their area. It's their little village is shaped in a crescent. Mm-hmm. So I more or less divided everything into 6 sectors. Here you go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Here's where your radios are. So if there's guys from sectors 1 to 6, if something happens, say, hey, I'm in sector 6, and the patrol can head your way. And because if not, the way it was before, the guys were just sporadically all over the place. So if one guy saw something, no one would know who it was. No one would know where it was. By the way, they didn't have radios. The night, and I mean, man, the time we hit the boat, they were patrolling, communicating, using the equipment that we had. That's right. We listened to it till 3 in the morning. It was beautiful to listen to. So we increased survivability. We increased safety. We taught gun safety, common sense, basic patrol tactics. And they employed it immediately. They're not stupid people. No. As they keep getting portrayed, they're not foolish.
They picked it up immediately. They were walking around, communicating perfectly on the radios. They were deploying the night vision. They had these high-powered flashlights. They immediately put them into action right after you and Henry got done drilling them on how to walk in the column. And Jairo, to his credit, Jairo's a great leader. He deserves to be the Apu, the chief of that village. He's 32 years old. I was very impressed with Jairo. He was yelling out commands to the guys in the column. He was keeping them on, he was keeping their attention focused on the drills. And I have no doubt, Doug, that right at this very moment, they're out there in that village, patrolling in the column, just like you guys taught them, deploying that technology. They're probably scanning with those night vision goggles, with the high-powered flashlights, the thermal binocular that you gave Jairo. I guarantee you they're out there like a bunch of badasses right now patrolling their village. Let's summarize, if we can, what we think we know and what we think we don't know. Let's delineate these 2 categories. Let's start with what we know. I've made some bullet points here. I'm going to go through them, and then you add anything else you want to add to it. So here's what I think you and I can say collectively that we now know to be fact. Number 1, no jetpacks.
Nope.
We're not talking about jetpack technology here. They do have maybe battery packs on their back, Maybe they're small reactors. I don't know, but they're not jetpacks. We are not dealing with jetpack technology of any kind. They are using the discs on their boots to accelerate, to hover, and also these platforms. No jetpacks. Number two, these are not miners. These are not river miners. Forget it. Absolutely not. They're not miners. They're also not narcos. They are not drug traffickers. This operation is much too complicated. The technology is much too advanced. We are not dealing with illegal miners, river miners, or drug traffickers.
In regard to narcos, for a long time, I was leaning very heavily on that, because the narcos in Mexico are running around with equipment that you cannot get, that you cannot get unless you are a military, and you have all those different contracts, right? So somehow or another, the Mexican cartels have our equipment, the quad nods that you see so many of these people having now in video games and whatnot, drone jamming capabilities, radio jamming capabilities. They have what our military has. We saw it when we were working on the border. They would step on our frequency, which is supposed to not be able to happen. But that's not what we experienced. That is what I thought we would see.
Let's also remember, because you and I thought we were in trouble. We might be in danger because we might be dealing with drug traffickers here, with narcos, and they might be watching us right now, and they might not be taking too kindly to the fact that we're equipping these villagers with night vision goggles and high power flashlights and radios and so forth. So we actually had a moment, I would say probably just for a couple hours, where we were taking some interviews. We went back to the boat. We met with our securities guys, and we said, "Hey, what if we're dealing with narcos here? And what does that mean in terms of security? How should we approach this situation?" But when we went back in the village and began to hear more testimonies, it became abundantly evident that no, we're not dealing with narcos. And what really crossed out the narco possibility for me was these advanced aerospace vehicles. The narcos don't have those. We're talking about probably alien tech, at least alien reverse engineered technology here. The narcos don't have these things. They have the best of maybe what our military has and has deployed to some extent, in Afghanistan and Iraq, but they don't have silent hovering craft they don't have that. So narcos, no. Okay, so we also know, whoever these people are, they are definitely not trying to drive the villagers off their land. That is not the objective. How do we know that? Because Nauta has a population of 35,000, okay? There is no way that anybody, not even narcos, are going to drive away the population of Nauta, an old established jungle city. No way, not happening. That is clearly not the objective. And keep in mind that the very same phenomenon occurred in Nauta. So that is clearly not the objective here.
I want to add another thing that you actually made very clear to me. Earlier, I had mentioned that the Pintayacu was actually the perfect place to do this because they're so unarmed. They don't have a well-established means of self-defense. It wouldn't take much to overwhelm that village. It really wouldn't with the right guys. But you go 55 miles southwest as the crow flies, and you go to Nauta. You have AK-47s and hunting rifles.
Now you got the military.
I'm not taking a shot from either one of those. Yeah. I'm not going in there trying to abduct people without any means of self-defense. That's suicide. This is a level of militarily, tactically, it's hard to explain. Why would you go in there unarmed?
Nauta has military presence, the Army, the Navy, and it has, as you said, there's the firearms in Nauta are military grade. They're not shotguns held together with wire, with
police
hanger wire. I mean, we're talking about, as you said, automatic weapons. So again, this idea that miners or narcos are attempting to scare the villagers, pretend they're face peelers, and drive them off their land. No. Nope. We can cross that off the list, confidently cross that off the list. We know that that's not the case. We also know, by the way, that whoever these entities are, they do peel faces, apparently. For whatever reason, for whatever motive, they are engaging in peeling faces. So they can be rightly described as face peelers, pelacaras. We also know that their victims are male and female, and young and, I'm not going to say old, but adolescents and young adults, certainly, because of that individual. By the way, the people in the village, I haven't checked this out independently yet, but you and I displayed in one of our videos, we showed a video of a young man who had his face peeled off. And that video that cell phone video that was taken got the video that I uploaded featuring that cell phone video. It was age restricted by YouTube, and it was taken out of the algorithm. It was heading for 1 million views, and then YouTube age restricted it. So we're not going to show it again, but you'll all recall that video, I think, of the man without his face. The villagers told me that occurred in the region of the jungle, in that same region of the jungle, not the same village, but in the same region of the jungle. Now, whether or not that's true, that's what they told me. But it may or may not be true, but nevertheless, the victims are male and female and are adolescents and apparently at least young adults. That individual looked like he was in his early 20s. We also know, remember, we're talking about what we know here. We also know, as we've said, that whoever these people are, these things are, they are in possession of exceedingly advanced technology. I would go so far as to say, although this is a conjecture, I would go so far as to say alien or reverse alien technology. This is UFO type stuff. Okay, so we know that this is not conventional hardware. All right. We also know that the Navy did not investigate. You and I were the first journalists or investigators to show up on the scene, besides the police, who had to show up because there was an attempted abduction. That's why they went there. They had to go. There was an attempted abduction. They had to go take down the testimony of Talia, and they're the ones who concocted that ridiculous jetpack miner thing. Okay, so you and I were the first ones to actually show up to conduct an investigation into the phenomenon. All right, we know that. Okay, let's talk about then what we don't know. We have no idea whatsoever if we are dealing with human or non-human beings. We have no idea. Again, you can make the argument on both sides. There are indications on both sides that it might be one way or the other, or that third option, are we dealing with human and non-human beings, some sort of a coalition between the two, right? Or perhaps even some sort of a conflict between the two. I don't know. We don't know. Nobody knows. It is unknown. So if anybody walks away from this video saying they went out there and found out that the pelacaras are just, gringos or something, you're absolutely wrong. That's not the case. We don't know any of that for sure. There's just as much indication that these are non-humans as they are humans. It is simply unknown. We also do not know what their objectives are. It is not clear. We know what their objectives aren't, in that they're not there to drive the villagers off their land, but we have no idea what their objectives are. We speculated about maybe they're imitating the face peeler phenomenon to cover up some other thing. Who knows? We do not know what the objectives are. I don't think we can rule out sex trafficking and organ harvesting. We don't know what they were going to do with Talia. We don't know. We don't know if they were going to take her away or if they decided to just harvest her face right there. We don't know what exactly their plans were for Talia. All we know is that they were foiled, that they did not complete the objective, which apparently was to cut her face off at the very least. So we do not know if sex trafficking and organ harvesting is involved in this phenomenon. It very well may be. We do not know. Actually, let me jump back up to the what we know category, because there's two more things. I put them in the wrong category on my screen here, actually. So let me go and insert these. Let me back up and go back to the what we know category. Sorry for the confusion. We know that this is not mass psychosis, not in this village. We're not dealing with psychosis. And also, we know that this is not a paranormal phenomenon. This is a very violently physical phenomenon. It's a physical phenomenon, obviously. So it's not mass psychosis, and it's not paranormal. Those are things that we know. That's in the what we know category. Now, apart from the things I've listed in what we don't know, can you think of anything else?
No, off the top of my head, I mean, we don't know what they're using the faces for. Now, we were told a story that these people's bloodlines may be very important, that they don't get any type of inoculations. They don't allow their blood to be drawn. Maybe there's something within their blood that is needed. Maybe it's an eyes wide shut masquerade party at Epstein Island, part 2, and the faces are used as Halloween masks. Man, I don't know. I've never heard of this before. I've never seen so many witness testimonies that all led to the same thing. There might be some, variations here or there, but they all said the same thing. And then when we got to Nauta, same thing. That was very interesting. Yeah. There's no difference in what they said in Nauta from the Pintiaku.
Yeah, maybe this is some sort of the Predator movie where the whole purpose was they were hunters and they're just taking trophies. I don't know. I mean, it could be, probably not, but it could be. And the bloodline thing is interesting because we're talking about the Iquitu people. Okay, San Antonio de Pintuyacu is their original village. This is where they originate. This was their primary village, going hundreds of years back into the past. The bloodline of the Iquitu people is very strong. And in fact, I was told that they don't let their blood be drawn. They don't do anything like that. They're very, it's almost like a sacred thing to them. But the problem with that, with the speculating about maybe it has something to do with the bloodline is Nauta. Nauta's the problem. Nauta's a mishmash of all different kinds of tribes and non-tribal people. There's mestizos in there. There's Iquitu people in there. There's Awahun in there. There's all different kinds of tribal people inhabiting Nauta, just like Iquitu. So Nauta really just Nauta's the wild card here. It really just shoots holes in some of these other theories because it's an outlier. It doesn't fit this secluded jungle, village, easy target, pure bloodline native thing. It just doesn't. So, again, this is just, we don't know. We have no idea what the objective is. So are these, again, to summarize, are these gringos and Peruvian black operators working for cartels, working for the deep state, working for some paramilitary thing that's the paramilitary organization that has somehow has access to reverse engineered alien technology? Maybe. There's no definitive proof that that's the case. Are these aliens, gray aliens, tall grays, and that's why the helmets are large? That's why they've got these strange body armor and these strange capabilities. Are they just tall grays in armored bodysuits? Maybe there's no indication that is exactly the case either. We're somewhere in a gray area here. It could be anything at this point. We don't know. What I think you and I can say definitively is the phenomenon is absolutely 100% real. It's not imagined. It is real. It is happening. It's happening still right now in the Peruvian Amazon. The people are terrified of this phenomenon, and they're not patrolling around at night for nothing. They have encountered these people, these assailants, these mysterious Pela face-peeling assailants. They have encountered them, and they tried to abduct Talia. It was seen by multiple witnesses, and they have been begging the government to intervene, or at least to send the Navy to protect them. And these are not the activities, the posture, the attitudes of people who are making something up. And by the way, Talia, we talked about how traumatized she was. They took her to a village down the river to get treated for her laceration, and she was diagnosed in the village with severe PTSD. Her father showed us the documentation, and they suggested that the father take her to. They highly suggested that the father take her to Iquitos so that she can see a psychiatrist, and the father did not have the funds to do that. These particular individuals are very poor, And so we were also able to fund Talia.
The looks that Talia gave me, that sideways glance, I've never seen a look like that from a girl her age. Never seen that before. I mean, she was literally terrified of me. And we were there for a humanitarian reason. Yes, we were there for investigations, but this very quickly turned into a humanitarian mission just as quickly. Those people needed a lot of help. They needed their story told. Tim did a fantastic job. We worked like madmen while we were there. There was very little downtime for us, except for maybe here or there. We monitored, we observed at night. We stayed up until probably 2 or 3 every night.
We did do some fishing also.
We got a little fishing. we got destroyed by bugs. But you know what we did left a positive impact on those people.
Yes. I have an open invitation to return whenever I want. I'm in active contact with Hydro and the other villagers. I mean, they absolutely love us in that village, and I think just Talia, I'm sure, is not going to be as afraid of gringos as she was. She did warm up to us a little bit by the end of that encounter. She came onto the boat with her father, and we talked with her a little bit. She definitely was warming up to us and understanding that we were there to help her. So all in all, it was a very successful mission, and we did not get to film the phenomenon, but we did equip that village, and those guys are ready to kick some ass over there at this point. I witnessed firsthand Doug out there training these villagers. I was very impressed. Doug is an amazing instructor, and is doing, my brain is fading, I'm getting tired, but you do training courses with people, right?
Yeah, I do. I created an active shooter class that it helps a civilian learn to integrate with what we use in the military and law enforcement, basic tactics, and which most people don't have any actual training of basic tactics. They stand in front of a paper target and shoot it, and they think that's sufficient, but paper targets don't attack you. So we put you in scenarios. I was a use of force instructor, so I put you in scenarios where you actually have to think, and you have to deal with a role-playing person who will actually show you different types of levels of scenarios where it may be a shoot, don't shoot problem you got to figure out. So if you're ever interested in anything like that, we actually have a course going on here in Texas that's almost filled up, but we have another course going on in Tellico Plains, Tennessee. You can sign up there at readymaderesources.com. If you have any interests in taking a course, we'll be posting that on my website at americanvindictashow.com. If you got any questions about the training that I put on and you want to know further, just email me at americanvindictashow@gmail.com, and I'm sure Tim will put all that down in the description.
Yes.
Tim, your ability to communicate is the reason why we integrated with those people so well. We got called grifters, we got called giga chads, we got called all kinds of stuff. It doesn't matter. We went in, we did what we said we were going to do. We got the job done. We still got our faces. I drink some nasty.
Still have our faces. Yes, that great juice. Success. Great success.
Yeah. So we did what we said we were going to do. Mission accomplished. Good job. Without what you did, and as quickly as we got it done, this would not have gotten done. So my hat's off to you, man.
Well, thanks for accompanying me, Doug. There were dangers, and I want to thank everybody who was thinking about us and praying for us and sending us messages and worrying about us. There were many of you. Thank you very much. For those of you who may not be aware, I wrote a book called Birthright. It's 5-star reviewed on Amazon. You can get it on Amazon.com. You can get it on Walmart.com, BarnesandNoble.com, and other online book vendors. So if you haven't read Birthright, go pick up a copy. And that's going to be it for us on this video report. Thanks for tuning in, guys, and I hope you enjoyed it.
Wow, did you hear that? That's crazy. Timothy Alberino, what a guy. And he's so handsome. Just an all-around fringe hero, you know? There he is, braving the jungles of the Amazon to give us the story and the lowdown about these seemingly alien encounters. And wow, we heard some things that we didn't expect. That's crazy. Right, Slippers? Yeah, it's crazy. And you're kind of a crazy cat. Yeah, you are. Anyway, when I hear more about this, I will come back and talk to you guys. And it will be so great just to be with you once again. And so, I guess I'm gonna say goodbye. So, until next time, say goodnight, Slippers.